Good day. In this fourth video, I will be discussing the 7 institutional correction of the Philippines, namely the New Bilibid Prison, San Ramon Prison and Penal Farm, Iwahig Penal Colony, Correctional Institution for Women. We have the Davao Penal Colony, Leyte Regional Prison and Sablayan Prison and Penal Farm. So first, let's start with the New Bilibid Prison. The New Bilibid Prison, or NBP, in Muntinlupa, Metro Manila is the main insular penitentiary designed to house the prison population of the Philippines. So the New Bilibid Prison is the main penitentiary prison here in the Philippines. It is maintained by the Bureau of Corrections, or BUCOR, under the Department of Justice. So this New Bilibid Prison is maintained by BUCOR under the DOJ. As of May 2018, the NBP housed 26,877 convicted criminals. In 1940, prisoners were transferred to the New Bilibid Prison from the old Bilibid Prison. So these prisoners before, in the 1940, those prisoners from old Bilibid Prison was transferred to New Bilibid Prison. Also known as the Cárcel Presidio Correccional, from Spanish for Correctional Jail and Military Prison in Manila. The remnants of the old facility was used by the city of Manila as its detention center, known today as Manila City Jail. So the old facility before has been made as their detention center, which is known today as Manila City Jail. The penitentiary had an initial land area of 551 hectares, but 104 hectares were transferred to a housing project of the Department of Justice. So in all, this penitentiary, the NBP, has a land area of approximately 551 hectares, but some of these hectares are being used in order for housing project of the Department of Justice. Additional land of the NBP reservation is used for the Bureau of Corrections headquarters. So the land area of the NBP in this penitentiary was being half in order to made some housing project, and also for additional land area for use for the corrections headquarters. During Japanese occupation of the Philippines during World War II, Bilibid was a prisoner of war and civilian internee camp where the American soldiers and civilians were held by the Japanese. So during the Japanese occupation, the Bilibid prison was the prisoner of war and their civilians internee was the American soldiers. But 1,200 internees and POWs were freed by the American Army on February 4, 1945 during the Battle of Manila. So during the Battle of Manila, there are hundreds of internees, including the Army soldiers, who are being freed by the American Army. The government of the Philippines plans to create a regional prison in Nueva Ecija through a public-private partnership. The old Bilibid prison, then known as Cárcel Presidio Correccional in Spanish, it means Correctional Jail and Military Prison, occupied a rectangular piece of land that was part of the Mahalik estate in the heart of Manila. So the Philippines government plans to create a new prison in the Nueva Ecija through private-public partnership. The old prison was established by the Spanish colonial government on June 25, 1865 via royal decree. So the old Bilibid prison was established by the Spanish colonial government in Japanese occupation before. It is divided into two sections, the carcel, which could accommodate 600 inmates, and the Presidio, which could hold 527 prisoners. So these are the two sections of the old Bilibid prisons before, which is the carcel and the Presidio. Next is we have the San Ramon prison and penal farm. So according to historical accounts, the San Ramon prison was established in southern Zamboanga on August 21, 1870 through royal decree promulgated in 1869. So the San Ramon prison was established on August 21, 1870. It was established during the tenure of Governor General Ramon Blanco, whose patron saint the prison was named after. The facility was originally established for persons convicted of political crimes. So most of the prisoners in the San Ramon prison and penal farm was those political crimes. So the San Ramon name of prison was created name after Governor General Ramon Blanco, who is a patron saint. Considered the oldest penal facility in the country, prisoners in San Ramon were required to do agricultural work. So this San Ramon prison was the old penal facility in the Philippines. During the Spanish-American War in 1898, the prisoners in San Ramon were hastily released and the buildings destroyed. So because of this Spanish-American War, the San Ramon prison was destroyed. In 1907, the American administration re-established the prison farms. So after the Spanish and American War, the American administration re-established the San Ramon prison. In 1912, General John Pershing, Chief Executive of the Department of Mindanao and Sulu, classified the institution as a prison and penal colony and therein confined people sentenced by the courts under his jurisdiction. So, when General John Pershing, the Chief Executive of the Department of Mindanao, he classified this prison as the prison and penal colony. So, under Pershing's supervision, several buildings with a capacity for 600 prisoners were constructed. So, during his supervision, there are more constructed buildings which could occupy 600 prisoners. After several years, the colony became practical self-supporting with 75 coconut trees which were planted at the beginning of Pershing's administration, contributing to the colony's self-sufficiency. So, under the supervision of Pershing, there was a lot of coconut trees have been planted, which contribute to the colony's self-sufficiency. Aside from coconuts, rice, corn, papaya, and other crops were also cultivated during his administration. On November 1, 1905, Reorganization Act No. 1407 was approved, creating the Bureau of Prisons under the Department of Commerce and Police, integrating the old Bilibid Prison, San Ramon Penal Colony, and Iwahe Penal. The Philippine Coconut Authority took over management of the coconut farm from San Ramon. In 1995, Congressman Maria Clara Lobregat proposed the transfer of San Ramon Prison to Bongyao Town in the mountainous area of Zamboanga to give way to a special economic zone. So that was the second institutional corrections of the Philippines, the San Ramon Prison. Next is we have the Iwahig Penal Colony. So this facility was established during the American occupation. So the New Bilibid prison was established during the Spanish occupations, but this Iwahig colony was being established during the American occupation. It was, however, during the Spanish regime that Puerto Princesa was designated as a place where offenders sentenced to banishment were exiled. A specific area of Puerto Princesa was selected as the site for a correctional facility. So the Iwahig Penal Colony, which is designated in the Puerto Princesa, they choose Puerto Princesa as a site for a new correctional facility. The American military carved out a prison facility in the rainforest of Puerto Princesa. The institution had for its first superintendent Lieutenant George Wolfe, a member of the U.S. Expeditionary Force, who later became the first prison director. So, Superintendent Lieutenant George Wolfe was the first prison director of the Iwahig Penal Colony in Puerto Princesa. Governor Luke Wright authorized the establishment of penal colony in the province of Palawan on November 16, 1904. So Governor Luke Wright was the one who authorized the establishment of Iwahig Penal Colony in the province of Palawan. This penal settlement, which originally comprised an area of 22 hectares, originally served as the depository for prisoners who could not be accommodated at the Bilibid prison in Manila. So this penal settlement, the Iwahig Penal Colony, was originally served as the depository for prisoners, especially those who are not accommodated in the Bilibid prison in Manila. They will be accommodated in the penal settlement of Iwahig Penal Colony. In 1906, however, the Department of Commerce and Police, which later became the Department of Public Instruction, moved to turn the institution into a center of a penal colony, supervised in accordance with trends at the time. Through the department's efforts, the Philippines Commission of the United States government passed Act Number 1723 in 1907, classifying the settlement as penal institution. The settlement was a first beset by attempted escapes, but under the supervision of Colonel John R. White of the Philippine Constabulary, who would become superintendent of Iwahig in 1906, the colony became a successful settlement. So, under the supervision of Colonel John R., who became the superintendent of Iwahig in 1906, which became the Iwahig Penal Colony was become a successful settlement under his supervision. A merit system was devised for the prisoners and vocational activities were offered. So in the Iwahig Penal Colony, the prisoners had a vocational activities offered there. These include farming, fishing, forestry, carpentry, and hospital paramedical work. These are the vocational activities offered in the system in the prisoners in the Iway Penal Colony. So prisoners could choose the vocational activities that they wanted. In 1955, administrative order number was promulgated by the President and implemented by the Secretary of Justice and the Secretary of Agriculture and Natural Resources. This order allowed the distribution of colony land for cultivation by deserving colonists. The order also contained a list of qualifications for colonists who wish to apply for a lot to cultivate. The conditions for the settler's stay in his land, loan requirements, and marketing of the settlers' produced lots granted did not exceed into 6 hectares. On August 16, 1959, a committee was created by the President Carlos P. Garcia to study the state of national prisons. Accordingly, prisoners in Iway were divided into two groups, the settlers and the colonists. So the prisoners of Iway Penal Colony was being divided into two groups, which is the settlers and the colonists. The settlers are those engaged in farming for their own benefit. They are the ones whose applications for land to cultivate have been approved. The government furnishes the land and initial requirements for tools, dwellings, and beasts of burden. They are required to reimburse expenditures incurred for their maintenance and that of their families out of the products of their farms. Upon their release from the colony, they receive whatever amount of money they have credited in their favor after deducting the obligations they have. Iwayig is divided into 4 zones or districts, which are the Central Subcolony with an area of 14,700 hectares. Number 2, we have the Santa Lucia with 9,685 hectares. Number 3 is we have the Montebol with 8,000 hectares and Inagawan with 13 hectares. So these are the 4 zones or districts of Iwayig. Next is we have the Correctional Institution for Women, or also known as CIW. In a report dated January 22, 1959, submitted to a committee created by Administrative Order Number 287 by the President of the Philippines, it was noted that before a separate building was constructed, especially for women prisoners, all female convicted were confined at the old Bilibid prison on Ascarga Street, Manila. So these women prisoners was first incarcerated in the old Bilibid prison, but when the government decided to have establishment of separation for those convicted women prisoners to have their own facility, which is the Correctional Institution for Women. The male prisoners were confined in dormitories near the women's quarters. Because of these conditions, vocational activities of the women prisoners were limited to embroidery. So these vocational activities, most of the women prisoners, they're only limited to embroidery. When they become ill, the women were confined in a separate building which served as a hospital with nurses and prison physicians. When women prisoners needed surgery, they were operated on at the Bilibid prison. After the operation, they were transferred to the infirmary for convalescing. Prison authorities were aware of the conditions that the women prisoners had to endure within the prison. Consequently, the transfer of the women to a separate site became inevitable. After a series of negotiations started by Prison Director Ramon Victorio, the Philippine legislature passed Republic Act number 3579 in November 1929. This act number 3579, it means it authorized the transfer of all women inmates to a building in Welfareville at Mandaluyong, Rizal, and appropriated of 60,000 for the move. On February 14, 1931, the women prisoners were transferred from the old Bilibid prison to the building specially constructed for them, which is the correctional institution for women, in order for them to be separated from other inmates. Its old name was the women's prison. So CIW's old name was the women's prison and was changed to correctional institution for women after. This was in keeping with emerging trends in penology, which emphasized correction rather than punishment. So, this penology, it is to emphasize correction rather than punishment in women's inmates. Convicts were brought back into the social mainstream, adjusted and rehabilitated with a better outlook in life, because they emphasize correction rather than punishment. The CIW, according to a Senate report, it occupied 18 hectares. The original structure was a one-story building which housed the office, the brigades, the mess hall, kitchen, chapel, infirmary, bathrooms, and employees' restrooms. The building has a central courtyard with trees and flowering plants. The prisoners' vocational activities were expanded include poultry and piggery, because before these women's inmates were only limited to vocational activities such as more on embroidery, but now there were expanded, including the poultry and piggery, as well as cultivation of crops, flowers, and fruits. Living quarters for the institution's employees were later constructed in the compound. So next, during the Japanese occupation, the CIW, despite a drastic reduction in the number of its employees, continued with its work. A number of female military prisoners were also confined in the institution of CIW. They were later freed by the U.S. Army. So during the Japanese occupation, the the correctional institution for women also include the number of female military prisoners, but then later after, they were freed by the U.S. Army. So we could say that during the Japanese occupation, there were a lot of American Army, especially including those women military who are being confined in this institution and later was being freed by the U.S. Army. In 2000, a new 4-story building was constructed by the Department of Public Works within the grounds of CIW. It is the growing congestions in the facility. The CIW, or the Correctional Institution for Women, with a capacity for only 200 inmates, had to accommodate 1,000 inmates. So this is the Correctional Institution for Women, intended for those women prisoners who are convicted, and this was established in order for them to be separated from the other inmates, including the males. It is to separate them from, they were confined first in the old Bilibid prisons, but now they are transferred in the new establishment, which is the CIW. Now we have the next is the number 5 of the institutional correction of the Philippines, which is the Davao Penal Colony. So the Davao Penal Colony is the first penal settlement founded and organized by a Filipino administration, because way back on those recent topics that I've just mentioned, those other penal colonies and prisons that has been established was established by the Japanese and American occupation. But this penal colony in Davao was the first penal settlement that has been founded and administered by a Filipino administration. So the settlement, which originally had an area of approximately 30,000 hectares in the district of Panabo and Tagum, Davao del Norte, was formally established on January 21, 1932 by Virtue Act number of 3732. So this Davao Penal Colony was established on January 21, 1932, that is being administered by a Filipino administration. This Act of 3732 is authorized the Governor General to lease or sell the lands, buildings, and improvements in San Ramon Prison and Iwahe Penal Colony. It also granted the authority to the Secretary of Justice to establish a new prison and penal colony in suitable public land. A budget of 500,000 was allocated. Several committees were created to pick a suitable site for the penal settlement. In accordance with the recommendation of these committees, Governor Dwight Davis signed the Proclamation number 414 on October 7, 1931, which reserved a site for the penal colony in the Davao province in Mindanao. The site offered ideal conditions for agricultural activities. During the World War II, the colony was converted into a concentration camp where more than 1,000 Japanese internees were committed by the Philippine-American Armed Forces. So during the World War II, this colony in the Davao Penal Colony converted into a concentration camp. The Japanese were treated in accordance with the orders of the American commanding officer. On December 20, 1941, the Japanese Imperial Forces attacked Davao, and the colony was among the establishments taken over by the invading army. So way back before 1941, the Davao Penal Colony was being attacked by the Japanese Imperial Forces. The entire settlement was thrown into a confusion, and a great number of prisoners escaped because of this attack. So normal operations were inevitably disturbed. November 8, 1942, a representative of the Director of Prisons transferred the colony and its properties to the Japanese authorities. So, the Davao Penal Colony, who is being administered by the Filipino administration, has been transferred to the colonies and properties of the Japanese authorities. The remaining colony employees, their families, and the inmates evacuated to Iwahig, where they organized the Davao Penal Colony at Inagawan's sub-colony in Palawan. The organization of the colony in exile was authorized by the virtue of a Memorandum Order Number 60, dated on June 28, 1943, and signed by the Director of Prisons. After the liberation of the Philippines, the colony in exile in Palawan, in the Iwahig Penal Colony, returned to its old site in Davao. A great deal of rebuilding and repair had to be done because the war had almost completely destroyed the colony. Because of those happened, which has been attacked by the Japanese, the Davao Penal Colony have been destroyed because of this war, in which they need to rebuild and repair this colony. Next is we have the number 6, which is the Sablayan Prison and Penal Farm. So this prison was nearer to Manila than other penal colonies. The Sablayan Penal Colony is located in Occidental Mindoro and relatively new. It was established on September 26, 1954, by virtue of a Presidential Proclamation Number 72. The penal colony has a total land area approximately 16,190 hectares. So among the penal colonies here in the Philippines, the Sablayan Prison and Penal Farm was near to Manila. Prison record shows that the first colonies and employees arrived in Sablayan on January 15, 1955. Since then, several buildings have been constructed, including the colony's dormitories, employees' quarters, guardhouse, schoolhouse, chapel, recreational hall, and post exchange. There are 3 sub-colonies were later organized in the Sablayan Prison and Penal Farm. One is the reservation, which is the day remains part of a protected rain forest. Another is a coastal area. The third was used by the national government as the relocation site for refugees from the eruption of Mount Pinatubo eruption in 1991. So these are the 3 sub-colonies that has been organized in the Sablayan Prison, which is the reservation, the coastal area, and the relocation site for refugees. Sablayan Prison is a facility where prisoners from the New Bilibid prisons are brought for decongestion processes. So those prisoners or inmates from the New Bilibid prisons has been transferred or brought to the Sablayan in order for them to have decongestion purposes. So it follows the same colony standard as the other penal farms. Lastly is we have the Leyte Regional Prison. So the Leyte Regional Prison, situated in Abuyog, Southern Leyte, was established a year after the declaration of martial law in 1972 by virtue of Presidential Decree Number 28. So this was established year after the declaration of martial law. While its plantilla and institutional plan were almost ideal, lack of funds made the prison unable to realize its full potential, and its facilities are often below par compared with those of other establishment penal farms. So, because of lack of funds in this prison, it made unable to realize the potential and its facilities, because in other penal, the 7 penal colonies, if you are going to rate them, the Leyte Regional Prison is below among them because of the lack of funds. So the Leyte Regional Prison has an inmate capacity of only 500. It follows the same agricultural format as the main correctional program, in addition to some rehabilitation activities. The prison admits convicted offenders from Regional Regional 6 and from the National Penitentiary in Muntinlupa. So these are the 7 institutional correction of the Philippines. So the New Bilibid prison was being established during the Japanese occupations, and others are being established during the American occupations, but only the Davao Penal Colony has been established by, it was the first penal settlement that has been administered by the Filipino administrations. But among those 7 institutional corrections here in the Philippines, the Leyte Regional Prison is below average on the prisons that has been established here in the Philippines. So that ends my discussions here in this 4th video.